It's time to come out of the Matrix.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The Vaden has spoken.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland.
Welcome to Beyond the Matrix, everyone. I'm your host, Ira Michelson.
And I am Rod Bryant.
And here we are for another Sunday afternoon. I don't know about you, Achi, but I am extremely excited about the show today.
I am too. As a matter of fact, the overall intelligence of the room has shot up out to the roof because we're at such low levels.
Well, it's definitely not us. I mean, I wanted to say that I'm so excited I could spit, but
don't do that.
But when I do that, Rabbi Tovia, singer, gets very upset with me and then takes me to task. So
I thought that was really funny. You know, I've actually heard that phrase before once in my life, but I was not, after his reaction, going to ever say I heard it before.
Well, I mean, look, I don't understand. I mean, you know, it's like he comes from Borough Park. My father grew up in Borough Park. My grandparents lived in Borough Park. I used to go there all the time. I mean, this is, he makes it sound like, it's like my rabbi says, I guess my rabbi always gives me a hard time because I have a beard and he doesn't. And he says, well, Ira, you're much more frum than I am because you have a beard, you know. So,
well, we'll have to give him a hard time sometime. We'll get a chance to turn it around on him.
Yeah, absolutely. So why am I so excited? Well, we have, as always, we try to bring you, our listeners, people who are on the cutting edge of the different subjects and the different concepts that come up all the time. It's whether or not you ask us a question or we see something on Facebook that somebody posts. For instance, I had a woman contact me a few weeks ago. She's a former Christian that came out of Christianity. She's looking for a home. Do I become B'nai Noach? Do I convert to Judaism? She shared with me that her family came out with her as well and gave up idolatry. But then she said something interesting. She said, my son, who came out also because he saw all the inconsistencies in the New Testament, she says now started studying further in the Tanakh, and now he has questions about that, and now he's giving up belief in Hashem, he's giving up belief in God, and he's moving towards atheism. And wow. It's amazing. And then we had Jerry Siegel on recently, talking about his new book, The 70 Weeks of Daniel.
Right, which was a great interview, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't listened to the archive, definitely consider going back in there and listening to that and consider getting Jerry's book. But Jerry and I sat down one day and Jerry said to me, Ira, the work that we do in trying to bring Jews back to Torah and the work that we do in the counter-missionary movement, trying to come against false teachings geared towards the Jewish community, he goes, is great. He says, but one of the things that I see is a problem with atheism creeping in to the Jewish community. And I was telling him that I had recently started reading a book called Torah, Chazal, and Science by Rav Meiselman. I used that a quote from his book in my presentation in Toronto when I spoke there. And he said, that's great. He says, but the problem is that comes specifically from a rabbi. He said, what we need to do is we need to find somebody that comes not only from the context of Judaism, but somebody who's a trained scientist.
Correct.
And that can bring these two together and make sense of it for us. And it's interesting because I talked to somebody, one of my buddies, and he said to me, and he handed me a book, and the book is called The Science of God. The convergence of scientific and biblical wisdom by Dr. Gerald Schroeder. And, man, just like in the first couple of pages, Rod, I was just like,
blown away.
Are you kidding me?
Right.
On top of that, me being kind of a, people used to not like when I used to say this, but kind of being kind of a semi-Kabbalist. I was just loved it when he touched on that subject and quoted quite frequently from Rom Bond, from Nachmanides.
Right.
And so I contacted him. And
he actually talked to you. That's amazing.
Well, that is amazing, isn't it?
Well, this is not, it's just not one book. I mean, he has, God According to God, the Hidden Faces of God. You mentioned the Science of God, Genesis and the Big Bang. I mean, he's really taken on the skeptics from both sides, sort of the cosmological and theological debate. And what I really appreciate about what our guest does is he takes on both sides, because there are levels of myth and misunderstanding, even in the religious community, just statements that are made and have been made for centuries that he also takes on. And I really am excited about this hour, because it's going to provide you and I, as well as everyone is going to be listening, with a whole new perspective to engage their intellect in knowing Hashem. One of the things that you and I believe very strongly is what's unique about the age that we live in is knowledge has increased to the place to where there's getting ready to be an absolute download of divine knowledge that is going to come to all mankind. And I believe that this is one of the avenues that will take place, is sort of this technology of God. I know that almost seems to be juxtaposed phrases or concepts, but the whole idea of the technology of God and the technology of Torah is right here at our fingertips. And for the first time in history, is it available to every human being that is able to take a couple of clicks on a mouse pad or download something onto their iPod.
Absolutely. And Rav Sutton, deals with that subject as well when we've had Rabbi Sutton on. And I think that really what we are is we're at such a unique time in history where when we can bring together these two, when we can make sense of it, like when a scientist like Dr. Schroeder, who's also so knowledgeable in a Bible and Talmud, can bring these two things together. I think that we're on the cusp of really entering in an incredible age, because these are the questions that people always have. These are the questions that people have. How do I make sense of my faith as a believer in the Holy One, and at the same time try to make sense of what science is telling me? So we could talk about this ourselves, but remember, at our level, we're not bringing much information to the people.
No one tuned in to listen to you and I schmooze about science,
especially since we've been promoting Dr. Schroeder being on it. Anyway, Dr. Schroeder is a scientist with over 30 years of experience in research and teaching. He earned his bachelor's, his master's, and his doctorate degrees all at MIT, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, with his doctorate thesis being under the supervision of physics professor Robley D. Evans. This was followed by 5 years on the staff of the MIT physics department prior to moving to Israel and making Aliyah, where he was part of the Weizmann Institute of Science and the Volcani Research Institute, while also having a laboratory at the Hebrew University. And his doctorate is in two fields, earth sciences and physics. But not only that, Dr. Schroeder also has formal theological training in biblical, Talmudic, and Kabbalistic interpretation, which includes 15 years of study under some of the Torah giants like the late Rabbi Herman Pollack of blessed memory, Rabbi Chaim Brevender, and Rabbi Noah Weisberg of blessed memory. So without further ado, I want to introduce everybody to our special guest, Dr. Gerald Schroeder. Dr. Schroeder, are you with us?
I'm here, and I am very happy to be with you.
And we're happy to have you.
Not only here, I'm in a good mood. Thank you for having me.
Well, Dr. Schroeder, we know that it's late in Israel, but we are very excited to hear from you. One of the things that we'd like to do at the very onset, upon welcoming you, is to ask you to give us a little background. We know that you just didn't appear out of nowhere as a very observant Jewish physicist, an author, and lecturer. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up to this place in your life.
Okay. Well, Well, first, I think one of the formative aspects was that I grew up. My folks lived quite a ways out from New York City. It was very rural to the point where you couldn't see the next neighbor's house because of all the trees and the orchards. And there's something about nature that makes you feel that there might be something deeper. You know, it's a mistake to think that the seasons are like a cycle. They're not. They're like a helix. They spiral through time. Winter comes each winter, but it's not the same. It's not the same hue, and the trees are not the same. We had an orchard, and we're pruning trees every winter season. So you see like a cycle in the world, as if there's something going on beyond just the physical. But I leave that aside. Then I had the very good fortune of going to MIT, and the research there, primarily grad school. Undergraduate was very standard, but I knew I was Jewish. Okay, but that's about what I knew. Okay, that was it. You know, the neighbors didn't let me forget it, even if I couldn't see their houses. But in my research at Tech at MIT, especially in grad school, I started doing a lot of work with nuclear work, and I had to witness quite a few nuclear explosions, atomic bombs. And the first one was in Nevada, and I came back after doing the research out there. I was in grad school at MIT. Then I came back, and it was shortly before Yom Kippur. And the rabbi phoned me and asked me maybe I'd like to give a talk. Now, I'd only spoken to him maybe twice in all the many undergraduate years and graduate years I'd been at MIT. But would I like to give a talk on Yom Kippur? Well, you know, they need a number of warm bodies because there's services. There's Orthodox, there's conservative, there's Reconstruction, there's egalitarian, there's Reform.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so they need people to give a talk. So I was one of them, and I had nothing to talk about except the bomb. I talked about the bomb, not like the phenomena of seeing this power, just the amazingness of witnessing the nuclear explosion. And it was a real good talk, I have to say, because it'd be pretty hard not to say a good talk, you know, discussing something as phenomenal. So the next year they asked if I would talk as well, but I had to get another topic. So I had to start studying. So I started reading books on Jewish philosophy. And put it this way, by the fourth year, when I was giving the fourth talk, by that time I was putting on tefillin. In other words, it's like it grabs you. I started with very, very little understanding of what Torah was about, what the Bible was about, what Judaism was about. My grandmother on my mother's side was Orthodox. I was driven to my bar mitzvah to show you the level that we were at, okay? Mm-hmm. My grandmother, obviously, had taken a room near the synagogue. And I think that was... I never thought that how silly what she was doing, all these things that my grandmother did as an Orthodox Jewish, it just wasn't relevant to me. I didn't think yes or no. I just didn't think about it. And I think a lot of people are in that level. But the more I studied the philosophy of Judaism, not so much the religion, but the philosophy of Judaism, it became almost like it's such deep logic. You know, it's not surprising there's so many brilliant Jews in the world. There's such deep logic. And it drew me in. And as I say, by the fourth year, I was putting on tefillin. I live in Israel. I'm talking from Jerusalem for those that don't realize it. And right now, thank God, my family. I guess we would call ourselves modern Orthodox, which means Orthodox. And so that's the genesis of my flow. So I wasn't always into this, but the deeper I studied, the more I realized that it had something that was more than just words and ritual. It seems like ritual from the outside, but when you're inside, you can see how it actually does work on your body, work on how you see the world, not just on your soul, but just in general, your whole worldview. So that's a long story.
Well, Dr. Schroeder, let me ask you, was there any single discovery or thing that you studied in your field of study that caused you to have sort of the aha moment that, you know what, this is a path of reality, that there is a creator of the universe, and he is actively provided us with this great guidance that comes from the Torah and from Jewish philosophy? Was there a moment like that?
Well, I would say that I don't know if it'd be sudden insight, but because I had a science background already, I knew that there must be answers to problems that were confronting some of my colleagues. So I started studying part-time in Israel, before Israel with the Hillel Rabbi, but then in Israel I went a few days a week at the Weizmann Institute and a few days of the same week at yeshiva. Mm-hmm. And so I had science behind me, and the students in the yeshiva had such questions that I knew there had to be answers for. You know, like, how can 6 days, and isn't that silly? You know, the 6 days, the creation chapter, the universe is billions of years old, and what about dinosaurs, and what about the development of life, and all these questions. And from the science background, I realized there had to be answers. And then we started having kids, thank God, also. So and we would go to some of the caves in Israel that have Neanderthals and Cro-Magnon. They go back 50, 60, 70,000 years. Israel is one of the central places. And I knew there had to be a way of not bending the Bible to make the science match and not bending the science, but there had to be a way in which they were compatible. So I wouldn't say it was a eureka moment, but the moment when I first did my calculation of the age of the universe. But that time, that's a few decades into this work already. And the numbers matched. And that was, I mean, I ran to my wife. I said, look at these numbers. I can't believe it, Barbara. So that could be a eureka moment. Excuse me?
Right. What I was going to say is when I saw your presentation in Houston on this on the very subject matter of the age of the universe, it was astounding how it all worked out. I mean, and it fits within science as well. It was a mind-boggling experience to sit and listen to you present that. And this information can also be found in one of your books. What is the name of the book that you would recommend for someone to be able to do this research?
Well,
see this?
The one you mentioned before, it's the second book. The Science of God deals with a couple of chapters on the age of the universe from the Bible's point of view, and the science point of view. It goes into quite a bit of detail. Some of this is at my website also, GeraldSchroeder.com. It also deals with origins of humans, and I should make it clear in all of the work I do, I use only ancient biblical commentary on understanding the scientific aspects of the text. I don't use any modern biblical commentary because all modern commentators have heard of dinosaurs, and they've heard of cavemen, they've heard of the Hubble telescope. There's always this bending the Bible to match the science, or bending the science to match the Bible. But when you take ancient commentators and they discuss, like Nachmanides, the Ramban, Nachmanides in the year 1250, discusses that there are two perspectives of time in the Bible. Who would think of two perspectives? I mean, 800 or 1,000 years ago, people are talking about perspectives of time? Yeah, he was, and he's the one that essentially led me by the nose to develop this double understanding of the time as listed in the Torah and time is listed in the science community, that they actually match, not by bending either, but that they match. And the source of that information is almost 1,000 years old. I put the numbers in. I'm just a lucky guy that happens to live at a time when we know the numbers from the science point of view. And so when you have these two perspectives of time, looking at the age of the universe, it does turn out that 6 24-hour days, and that's quite interesting, by the way, that you might realize that all ancient commentary goes out on the limb and says that when the Bible says there's, even in Genesis chapter 1, evening, morning, day 1, evening, morning, a second day, the pure person that are not familiar with it, Genesis chapter 1, which goes from the creation of the universe to the creation of human beings, and it's broken into 6 days, and the text says at the end of each day there is evening and morning, and then the day is numbered. Now the Bible uses the word day, yom. It doesn't use an indefinite period, like there are Hebrew words, biblical Hebrew words like Onah, Tukufa, Moed, at least 3 right off the top of my head. The Bible could have said there was the first Moed, the first indefinite period of time. But the text says day. And what's extraordinary is the Talmud, Rashi, these are the famous commentators on the Bible, tell us these days were 24 hours each. Now, why would I have to be told that the word yom, the Hebrew word yom, which means day, means 24 hours? We know it means 24 hours. But they were explicit. So commentators that say, oh, well, the days weren't really 24 hours, they were long periods of time, that's called bending the Bible to match the science. But the science comes and tells us that 6 24-hour days, from the Bible's perspective, in fact does match 14 billion years from our measurement. When we say the universe, as a scientist says, the universe is approximately 14 billion years old, there's another half of the sentence. The universe is approximately 14 billion years old as measured from the time-space coordinates of the Earth, or in English, as measured today from the position of the universe, the position of the Earth in the universe today. But there are other measurements as well. There are different values, and one is the biblical one. So it's not bending the Bible. Pardon me for repeating myself, but all my work, I use only ancient commentary. And I think that's been the power of it, thank God, because you can't say, well, Schroeder's bending the Bible. These commentators were out there 1,000 years before people were digging up fossils talking about cavemen.
Right. So I'm looking at the book right now, The Science of God, and talking about Nachmanides. To quote from your book, you write, "The consistency of nature is also a basic tenet of biblical religion. 800 years ago, the Kabbalist Nachmanides wrote that since the world came into existence, God's blessing did not create something new from nothing. Instead, the world functions according to its natural pattern. In secular terms, Kabbalah had stated that the laws of nature were and are adequate to channel our universe towards the development and sustenance of life." And that was just, when I listened to your presentation and I read that, it's just an amazing concept. So maybe you could talk a little bit about this concept of the expansion of the universe and the idea that the natural order was set up in order to bring forth life, according to science and the Bible.
Well, many persons, atheists, skeptics, agnostics, all tell us that the universe is in fact tuned for life. The conditions of the universe are perfect. So much so that the journal Scientific American, which is 100% materialist, to the extent that every month they have a paid column by Mike Schwirmer, the founder of the Skeptic Society of the World, to have a column which shows that the metaphysical really doesn't have much of a basis, that the world is primarily materialistic. And Scientific American went out on the limb several years ago, which says explicitly that the universe is so well tuned for life, and there are so many nuances, the laws of nature. Until you've studied some of the laws of the basics of the physics of the world, you can say it's tuned for life, but when you study the actual numbers, it's overwhelming. And so that this journal, which is not peer-reviewed, you should realize, but it's the most widely read science journal in the world by far, said explicitly, if we're the only universe, we're a designer universe. So their argument is this universe is so perfect that there must be other universes that are not perfect. Well, there's no logic to that statement whatsoever. The fact that we're perfect doesn't prove there's other universes that aren't perfect. What it does prove is that we are that our universe is made for life. And the very famous cosmologist from England, Bernard Carr, says it perfectly. If you don't want God, you better have multiple universes. In other words, the laws of nature are so intricately woven that it's either a design universe or there's a gazillion other universes, each with its own sets of laws, and so most of them are losers. Obviously, we're the winner, or we wouldn't be here. But that's it. That's totally illogic. If the only proof that there are other universes is that our universe is perfect for life, that doesn't prove there are other universes. But it does show that everyone accepts the fact that we are a universe that is made for life. But notice it doesn't say how life started. We are a universe that is made for sustaining life. But nowhere in that statement does it say that we're a universe made for the beginning of life. And there's these ongoing discussions with people that write to me. There are no data at the moment that tell us how life started. There is a theory of RNA. I know the genes have DNA and RNA. RNA, it's so unstable that there's no chance that RNA was the origin of life. In other words, let's get too technical. I'll just put it this way. There are no data. I think it was Feynman that said it, this brilliant human being who was not considered an observant Jew. He said, anyone who tells you, oh, well, no, I'm just saying that there's something wrong. I don't know why we keep coming out here. Well, first of all, because it's we take this stuff for granted. We're separated by thousands of miles. For me, it's pitch black. It's daylight. And the fact that we lose context for 2 seconds, we think, oh, hey, what's happening to the world? I mean, we just take these things for granted. It's phenomenal that the world can be so put together that we can talk like this thousands of miles away and be upset. If for 2 seconds we're not connected. Go back 100 years and you'd think it's a miracle.
Right.
Go back 1,000 years and you think you're a magician.
So if you could repeat the Feynman quote that you were...
Anyone who tells you that they know the origin of life is either a knave or a liar. Is either naive or is actually a knave.
Right.
Is either naive or a liar. No one understands how life started. That the laws of nature are ideal for sustaining life is very different from the laws of nature being ideal for starting life. Now, I would never say that any of these things prove there's a God. That's not my business. But if they do mean that science has questions, and it's not the God of the gaps, but it does sometimes call out for a deeper understanding of what is making the universe work. As simple as that. And to just toss it off as, we know. I mean, one of the classic things, there's a book called The God Delusion.
Dawkins.
By Richard Dawkins.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I heard it on books on tape, okay? So I didn't read the paper version, but I did. Well, I did read part of the paper version, which made me want to read the books on tape, where they're talking about going on the development of the universe, and then, like almost under the breath, at least in the books on tape, but also in the written version, it says, and with a stroke of luck, the molecules came together, and a replicating molecule of life started as a stroke of luck. I mean, it's almost embarrassing. And then they jump immediately after that into how life then developed from that point on.
Right, and he goes on in that book to
once you have DNA, you can do a lot of stuff. Yeah. Like once you have an alphabet, you can write a lot of different books.
In talking about the gap, you brought up the gaps. He says, Dawkins, creationists eagerly seek a gap in present-day knowledge or understanding. If an apparent gap is found, it's assumed that God by default must fill it.
Yeah, well, that is one of the shortcomings of, I would say, creationists or people that rely on the God of the gaps. Now, those gaps, even when they're filled, are filled with such complexity that it's better than the God of the gaps because it's the God of the complexity. I mean, some of these things that were once questioned, and then see how they can then fold together. The complexity that fills that in, it's extraordinary. The other inventor of this concept of evolution, Wallace, felt that there was very strongly a divine force acting in the world. Darwin hints at that, but he doesn't actually. Well, he does say it. He does say it in the closing lines. Charles Darwin, because we're jumping to evolution now, so that's maybe not. Should we? Can you mind if I just jump a bit to evolution?
No. Go ahead.
Go. Absolutely.
So Charles Darwin, and it's really this is quite crucial for persons, I think, to realize this. Charles Darwin, in the closing chapter of The Origin of Species, 1859, is quoted, I have to see if I can find this quickly because I hadn't, is quoted like this by the late Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard University, listed as one of the 20 most important writers of the 20th century, brilliant writer, as quoted in Scientific American, as quoted in the general press. Here is the closing lines of The Origin of Species, that famous book. There's a grandeur in this view of life, ... While this planet has gone cycling according to the fixed laws of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. That's the closing lines of the Charles Darwin Origin of Species, as quoted in Scientific American, the most widely read science journal in the world, as quoted by Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard University, unfortunately died of cancer a few years ago, who loved the Bible as literature but thought it was a myth. But now here is the closing. Here are the closing words, the closing lines of The Origin of Species, not according to Scientific American and not according to Stephen Jay Gould, who thought the Bible was beautiful but a myth, but according to Charles Darwin, the actual closing lines. There's an order in the grandeur in this view of life, there is a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one, and then while the planets are uncycling, to life to develop. Notice what's always left out. What's left out when it is quoted in the secular press is with the several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one. Notice the difference in the emphasis in what he's saying. Darwin held by the fact that there was a divine force acting, as did Albert Einstein and David Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion's famous statement: "If you live in Israel and you don't believe If you live in Israel and you don't believe in miracles, you're not a realist." So see, these statements are so often warped to make a point where they're not valid. Another is in evolution. I mean, we can talk about the age of the universe and get into the numbers also, but just to cover this first time around, superficially several topics. With evolution, the evolution of life is a two-stage it's two stages. It is mutations, make changes in the progeny, and then the second stage is completely fixed. If the mutations are with lions, well, if the baby lions, some lions are stronger and some lions are weaker, so it's not surprising that strong lions kill weak lions. The reason there are not a lot of lions in the world isn't hunters. There are not a lot of lions in the world because lions kill lions and they eat them. So it's not random that strong lions kill weak lions. The question is, what made the mutations that made some lions more strong than others, or made some cheetah baby faster than others, or made some people smarter than others? If you use the word evolution in its strict term, and the definition of terms is crucial, the founder of a place where I teach, Esher Torah, Noah Weinberg of blessed memory, magnificent human being, said the first thing in any discussion has to be to define the terms. So
yes.
How do you define evolution? So evolution has a strict definition in the scientific community. Random mutations, with the emphasis on random mutations in the sex line make some of the offspring, some of the progeny stronger, some weaker, some faster, some slower, etc. And then that has to be random, the first stage. The second stage is 100% not random. Strong lions eat weak lions. That's not random. So when people tell you, oh, well, no, evolution isn't random, it's the survival of the fittest. Well, obviously, the second stage isn't random. But to use the word evolution in the scientific community, you are stating that the mutations are random. And there are no data whatsoever that show the data are random. Take any evolutionist, any super skeptic, secular, however you want to say it, evolutionist, and have him show you that the mutations are random, and he will always have to back down. Have that person, I don't even like to say it because I'm going to put it out there, so I can say in general, have that person put his hand on something that means more to him than life, and say, now based on this whatever it is will disappear from you forever if you can prove that these mutations are random. They will always back down. There are no data, zero, that show the mutations are random, that change life to develop from the simple to the complex. That life to develop from the simple to the complex is, in my opinion, 100% certain. The question is, what drove the mutations that let, over billions of years, microbes become people sleeping through lectures? What drove that? Was it random? There are no data that show that it's random. The fossil record shows the simple become more and more complex. The Bible, Genesis chapter 1, devotes 6 sentences to the development of animal life. But that development is spot on for the fossil record. It starts in chapter 1, verse 20. Life starts in the waters, moves to the land, becomes mammalian, becomes people. That's all the fossil record. That's all the Bible says. The fossil record says it in millions of samples, the same flow. Life starts in the waters as a burst, and verse 20 says that the waters teem with teams of life. It is an explosion of life. It's called the Cambrian explosion. You can see drawings from museums about this. Life explodes in the waters, moves to the land, becomes mammalian, becomes people. That's what the Bible, that's what the fossil record says. The Bible says it in 6 sentences. The fossil record says it in hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of samples. The only question is what drove that development. I apologize for blabbing on and on here, but I get ballistic about this sometimes.
Well,
because these statements that have no scientific backing, no backing to them. The mutations happen. Life develops from the simple to the complex. But what drove the development is the big question.
Dr. Schroeder, let's look now, since we talked about the whole science side and that there are whole premises that are based without any evidence. Let's look at some religious myths that have been accepted as fact. And the one that I would like to point to, because it sort of goes along with what we've been talking about, is Adam was the first Homo sapien. And let's, for a moment, describe how you can match science research at the age of the bones that have been found versus Adam himself and the Nefesh, and what Maimonides, I believe
again, it's in the Science of God that I have 2 chapters on this. I have a bit of it in my first book, Genesis and the Big Bang. Science of God goes further. Again, only ancient commentary. Only ancient commentary. There are a few key aspects that a person would happen to know. If anyone's listening, they happen to have a book of the Genesis in front of them. We see that the word creation, I'm always struck with translations, they go to bed. But the word creation is very specific in Genesis chapter 1. It's something only that God does. And it's something coming into the universe that wasn't there before. Making a siyah or yetzirah or forming is something from something. When God says creation, bara, creation, that's something or some aspect from nothing. In biblical terms, a potter does not create a vessel. A potter makes a vessel from existing clay. So that's a subtlety that has to be realized. So the word creation only appears 3 times in Genesis chapter 1. I'm leading to the idea of Adam. The only physical creation, according to all ancient commentary, is the first sentence of the Bible. God creates the heavens and the earth. That's the only physical creation. Okay? Everything is made from that or formed from that. Everything. It may take God acting and tweaking the system. That's a person's opinion, however they think. But according to science today, the Big Bang creation is the only physical creation. But Torah has been saying that for 3,000 years, so it's good to hear that science has caught up. Because 50 years ago, if I were back at MIT teaching in physics, and I said, now let's talk about the age of the universe, I might have been thrown out. Because 50 years ago, the overwhelming scientific opinion was the universe was eternal. Most persons are not aware of that. The Torah claims it was a beginning. It was big news when Arno Pence and Robert Wilson, who get the Nobel Prize, discovered the echo of the Big Bang. It changed the world. There was a creation. Okay, so that's Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the physical creation. Then we read all the way up to Genesis chapter 1, verse 21, wording to the 5th day, where the next time the word creation appears. And it says God creates, and there's a big list of animals. Be careful of the translations, most of them are wrong. Okay? So but the big list. Now, animals are already mentioned in verse 20. So why do I have to be told in verse 20 that God creates some animals? Well, the creation can't be physical, according to all ancient commentary, and according to modern science. So it's nice that science has come to agree. And so if it's not physical, then it must be spiritual or metaphysical. That creation in verse 21 of the animals is the soul of animal life, the nefesh. In the Hebrew it's called the nefesh. And then we jump further to verse 26, and God says, let's make Adam. And then verse 27, God creates the Adam. For that I have to thank Peggy Ketz of Hawaii. If she ever hears this, please contact me again. Tell me some new thing. And anyway, the text says, in verse 26 of Genesis chapter 1, let us make Adam. Na'aseh, asiyah, making something from something. That's the development of life till we get to Adam. And then verse 27, God creates the Adam. God doesn't make the Adam, biblical on Hebrew. God makes Adam, generality. But God creates the Adam. Now, that creation can't be physical. That's only the first sentence of the Bible. So again, it must be spiritual. It's the neshama, the Hebrew word for a human soul. So humans have 2 souls, a nefesh and a neshama. The nefesh is what makes a person act like an animal. And the neshama says, stop acting like an animal. Don't throw your garbage in the street. You wouldn't throw it on your living room floor. Why do you throw it in the street? People don't want your garbage in the street. The nefesh says, because I don't want the garbage in my pocket. That's why I throw it on the street. And the neshama says, act like a human being already. So humans have this battle. Freud talked about it, but he probably got it from the Bible. That humans have this battle between the nefesh and the neshama. The nefesh makes you act like an egotist. The world is made for you. The neshama says the world is made for everyone. Act like that. So, okay, so that's a long introduction. So what makes a human is the neshama, the verse 27 of Genesis chapter 1. According to those two sentences and about 5 other biblical sentences, Maimonides, in the year 1190, that's 900 years ago, the Talmud, in the early part of the Talmud, Hagiga, other place, Kilayim, that's 1,800 years ago, tell us that there were beings that existed at the time of Adam that were completely human in shape and in intelligence. In shape and in intelligence. Well, wait a minute. So why aren't they human? They had the same shape, the same intelligence as human, because they're lacking the neshama. They were verse 26 Adams. They had a nefesh, but they didn't have the neshama, verse 27. Now, where would the Talmud 1,800 years ago, where would Maimonides in the year 1190, where would Rashi in the year 1090 have the understanding that there were beings that were human in shape and intelligence? They weren't Neanderthal, that is a low forehead, shape and intelligence, but they weren't human. Well, they got it from the text. And as it says, I think it's Psalm 85, the truth shall spring from the earth. And lo and behold, fossils are dug up, and we see fossils of these Homo sapiens going back 80, 90,000 years, inventing tools 50,000 years ago, inventing farming 10,000 years ago, weaving 9,000 years ago, etc. All these things are pre-Adam. Adam dates back biblically to less than 6,000 years. I think the year at the moment is 5774. But that's not the first Homo sapiens sapien. That's the creation of the neshama, which is told us by Nachmanides on chapter 2, verse 7, which is kind of like a problematic chapter, unless you know the whole text, where Nachmanides tells us in the year about 1250 that there's a complete, based on the Talmud, that there's a completely different being, and God put this neshama into the being, and the being changed into another kind of man. Not change into a man, to another kind of man. Change into a being with a neshama. That was the change. It was a spiritual change. These beings had the same shape and the same intelligence, but they weren't human. They lacked the neshama. What makes a human is the neshama. So if any of the persons listening here, or whoever, goes to the museum, and they see a group of people sitting in the museum exhibit, sitting around a campfire inventing farming 10,000 years ago, inventing tools 50,000, complex tools 50,000 years ago, cave paintings 15, 20,000 years old. Or if you read in the anthropology textbook that there were people 50,000 years ago that did wonderful things, and 30,000 years made these phenomenal paintings on the caves, and 10,000 more paintings 10,000 years ago in farming. And the anthropology tells us these people lived then 50, 60,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. The museum and the anthropology exhibits are 100% correct as they define a person. The definition of a person from the museum or from the anthropology textbook is a being that looks like you and looks like me, has your brains and my brains. And that's where the definition stops. And they go back 60, 70, 80,000 years, way before Adam. But the Bible's definition of a person is almost the same, but a slight difference. The Bible's definition of a person is a being that looks like you and looks like me, has your brains and my brains, and has the neshama, the soul of human life. It is a spiritual change. This is not Schroeder's idea. This is not my idea. This comes right out of an 1,800-year-old text called the Talmud, out of a 900-year-old 5-year-old text called The Guide for the Perplexed, Part 1, Chapter 7, out of the section of Talmud called Chagiga. It goes, the sources go on and on. Where, 800 years ago, 900 years ago, 1800 years ago from the Talmud, did they understand that these beings existed? It wasn't because they went to the local museum and saw the exhibit, because guess what? 1800 years ago, you know what didn't exist? The local museum. It's in the text. It's in the text. The problem with most people is, including many rabbis, is that the knowledge of to become a rabbi, what do you have to study Chulin. You know, the Talmud Chulin. You have to study Shabbos. You don't study about these kind of things. This is specialized information. The sad thing is, persons go off into the world with knowledge that they get from the bar mitzvah, and then they're confronted with what's out there in the scientific world, and they don't realize that the level that they learned for the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, if that's why they did science or try to drive a car with that level, they'd be crashing every day. Their deeper understanding. So both are correct. The Bible is correct. The museum is correct, provided you understand. One understands the subtle transition. It's a spiritual change. People, by the museum's definition, go back 60, 70,000 years. Homo sapiens sapiens, 100% us, but they weren't spiritualists. And just one more bit, I get so wound up in this stuff because it really is, I mean, it's like it's such a phenomenal piece of information. If you go to the British Museum in London, Barbara and I were just giving lectures. Barbara was a great lecturer. She's just phenomenal. My wife, Barbara Sofer. You see her on the website. You can also barbarasofer.com. She writes for the Jerusalem Post. You download some of her articles. Every 2 weeks she has an article in the Jerusalem Post called The Human Spirit on the miracles of living in Israel. Anyway, Barbara and I were giving lectures in London. We went to the British Museum. I'd been there before, and I bring this, what I'm about to say, also in the Science of God. The British Museum has an entire wing, an entire part of a floor, the third floor, on the Mesopotamian era. The Mesopotamian era shows a change in society that was so extreme that the museum is willing to dedicate room upon room in their museum documenting the change in society that takes place, and they date the change as just shortly after Adam. Now, they don't mention Adam, God forbid, and they don't mention the Bible, they don't mention the Shema. They merely say that approximately 5,500 years ago, interestingly, Adam, 57, 74, just a few hundred years after, gives time for the Shema to spread, society changed totally. Writing is invented, cities appear, trading is invented, the list goes on and on. So I called up the curator, because in the museum, if you're there, there's a phone on the wall, and I got the curator. And I didn't mention Adam, and I didn't mention the Bible, and I didn't mention the Neshama. I just said, wow, it's so interesting. You say 5,500 years ago, there was a sudden change in society. Well, what made that change happen? And you know what the reply was? We have no idea. The data aren't there that show a change, why it should change. But it's so extreme. Again, writing is invented. Large cities appear for the first time. Trading, division of labor. Why did that happen? Science doesn't have an answer. It's not a population explosion. That goes back to the invention of farming 10,000 years ago. That's brain work. So what I said to him was, I said, wait a minute, you're telling me large cities appear for the first time 10,000 years ago? What about the Tower of Jericho? I mean, large cities appear, first time at 5,500 years ago, which, as you'll remember, is just after Adam. I didn't say to him about him, just saying to us at the moment. And I said, but the Tower of Jericho goes back 10,000 years. He said, but don't confuse the Tower of Jericho with the Jericho that Joshua fights thousands of years after that 10,000-year-old tower. That 10,000-year tower was at the same oasis that allows Jericho to function today. But the Jericho that Joshua fights is miles on a side. It's the same oasis. But the Tower of Jericho 10,000 years ago was just an extended family. The Hebrew and Arabic word is a chamula. It's a good word to know in this part of the world. The chamula, mom, dad, the kids, a couple of cousins, the grandparents. The whole family unit did everything. Because you couldn't have a large city until there was the neshama, which the neshama lets you know that the world is integrated. And the neshama lets you live next to people that don't look like you, talk like you, and smell like you. Before the neshama, if you weren't part of my chamula, my stay off my property, or I'll have you for dinner, literally. It was a dog-eat-dog world. The neshama changed the world. The Torah dates. I don't know if I'm seeing we're having a problem. I don't know if am I still there? Am I there? Am I cut off?
Yes,
hello,
you're on.
Anybody there?
You're on.
No,
we can hear you.
So I'm just talking to the air.
No, you're on.
Are you guys there?
Yes, we're on. You can.
Okay, because on the screen sometimes you shut. Okay, so before the neshama, well, what's amazing is the British Museum dates when this change took place, and the Torah says why. The Torah says why is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, and that's why the calendar of the Bible is split into two parts. The time leading up to Adam, we don't have time to get into the age of the universe now, but the time leading up to Adam and the time thereafter. The description of time in Genesis chapter 1 changes at the creation of the soul of Adam. Up to Adam, it's evening and morning, day one, evening, morning, a second day, evening, morning, etc. But from Adam forward, every passage of time is human-based. Adam and Eve, it starts in chapter 5, the calendar again. Adam and Eve live X, Y, Z years, have a kid named Seth. Seth lives QVW years, has a kid named Enosh. Enosh lives VUVWX years and has a child named. From Adam forward, every passage of time is human-based, earth-based. Up to Adam, it's completely separate. The biblical calendar does not start, we'll put it this way, day zero in the biblical calendar does not start with the creation of the universe. The Talmud already talks about 1,800 years ago, not as something new. It was always known. The biblical calendar starts with Adam, which is kind of interesting. So the days before Adam, which are 24 hours each, but from the Bible's perspective of time, are not part of the calendar. So last Rosh Hashanah, the biblical New Year, Rosh means head, Ha means the, Shana year, the head of the year. The biblical New Year, the 5774, day zero on that calendar is Adam. So on that Rosh Hashanah, the universe wasn't 5774 years old. It was 5774 years plus the 5.5 or 6 days getting to Adam. That's for another discussion.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. If you could, we only have about 5 or 6 minutes left. So maybe you could touch on this to give people some sense of understanding how important it is, in a sense, to not take the Genesis account literally, that there really can't be literalism when you're looking at this, that there are so many things that are concealed in it that can only be brought out by some of the people that you talked about, some of the ancient commentaries that knew about these things beforehand.
And that's the key, that they were ancient. They were ancient, so they weren't trying to make the Bible match science. They were trying to make the Bible match reality, which they understood. I don't know how they had such a deep insight. But it's clearly there are persons that have an insight into the metaphysical reality that the quantum physics talks about it all the time now, this metaphysical reality of the world. But there's no time at the moment to get into that. But just and it's not just from the words. They had to have had some kind of a, I don't know, I hate to say it like a divine, because I don't like to force God into the picture, but it looks like God's in the picture, put it that way, that they got this information that they had is only now being confirmed by scientific discoveries. The irony isn't that science is moving away from the unchanging picture of the Bible. It's moving towards it, provided you know the science and the Bible. Maimonides says this in the Guide for the Perplexed. If you have a conflict, if you feel you have a conflict between the scientific understanding of the world and the theological understanding of the world, you got one or two problems. Either you don't understand the science or you don't understand the theology. But there can't be a conflict because there's only one author. That's Maimonides in the Guide for the Perplexed, the year 1190. And he's an ultimate rationalist. Maimonides is like the rationalist of the rationalists.
Yes.
So he doesn't like anything hocus pocus there. And for persons that are like saying, well, maybe it's exclusive or not exclusive, you know what? Make it very clear. There are 3 Middle Eastern religions. There are 3 Middle Eastern religions, and the nature of these calendars of the 3. Now, am I online still? Because now this has just popped up. We're having a problem. Do you hear me?
Yes,
I
you're
have
online.
to give you feedback because
you're still on.
Okay, I'm sorry. Because on my screen I keep getting something saying there's a problem with the connection, but I guess there's not.
You're still
There are 3 Middle Eastern religions. in chronological order, going back in time, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Look at the three calendars. The most recent of them is Islam. Where does it start in its calendar? With Muhammad, its prophet. Then there's Christianity. Where does it start its calendar? With its prophet, Jesus. And where does Judaism start its calendar? With Adam, all humanity. That's the difference between the three Middle Eastern religions. Only one starts its calendar and includes all humanity. We're the only pluralistic religion in the Middle East where we've never said that if you want to get to the big ball game in the sky, you have to be Jewish. We never said that whatsoever. Judaism is completely open to all, and it's such a deep difference, not just spiritually, but socially and philosophically, that we encompass. What we have to do is be a good human being. Jews have a certain way that they're supposed to act, because Jews are a marker in this world, for better or for worse. The Torah nowhere says that Jews are better. They always say that Jews are chosen to be a marker in this world. There are good Jews and there are bad Jews. The world knows that. Madoff was a lousy Jew. He ruined hundreds of thousands of people's lives with the Ponzi scheme. On the other hand, Salk and Sabin saved millions of lives by curing polio. I mean, so, there's both sides of the coin. Well, look at the clock. We're about to... Anyway. So, before a person writes off Judaism or being Jewish or however, understand that the Torah claims, maybe another time we'll talk about this, that there will be a marker in this world. Moses talks about it. God talks about it in the closing chapters of Deuteronomy, the fifth book of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, the fifth book of the Torah, that there will be a marker in this world for better or for the worse, but that marker will always stand out. Skeptics accept it also. There's a marker in this world. Jews are the marker. With a marker, we can be good or bad, but we will always stand out. And that's something no one debates. You can be the biggest skeptic in the world. They still say, for some reason, we stand out. So it's pretty important to realize that there's an obligation that exists here. And that obligation just very beautifully happens to be folded within a tradition that has produced excellence. Even if you didn't believe in any of it, it produced such excellence. Just look around the world. Stands out.
Amen.
Well, I appreciate letting me babble away like this.
We really appreciate it. We just want to know, before you go, is how can people go to your website? Do you have a website title or a name?
It's Gerald Schroeder, GeraldSchroeder.com. If you go on the website, there's hundreds of thousands of references. There's YouTube video. I have only watched one time what I'm told is many hundreds of YouTube. People sometimes come in, can I record? Can I photo? With these wonderful recorders these days, with video recorders. And I say, yeah, if you want to record the talk, do it. So there's lots of talks, and many of them are available on YouTube. But my website is Gerald Schroeder, Gerald with a G, GeraldSchroeder.com.
And we've also posted that up on Facebook. If you just want to find the
website, the easiest way is just to type in Google one of my titles of my books. I have an ebook called Well, What About Dinosaurs? Or if you typed in The Science of God, you'll come to the site also.
Right.
Yes.
And I would encourage the listeners, if you have not, then consider getting The Science of God. It's an amazing book, or getting any of Dr. Schroeder's books. Dr. Schroeder, I want to thank you on behalf of myself and Rod for coming on with us. And I hope I'm going to pop you an email really quick, and so you can check your schedule and see when you're available to come back on, so we can talk about the age of the universe and get into that a little bit with your concept of how light travels and so forth, and the expansion of the universe, and making things, not trying to bend the Bible, not trying to bend science, but fitting those together. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Stick with us week by week. We hope to have Rabbi Singer on again with us next week. We're talking about maybe discussing the difference between Echad versus Yachid from a biblical perspective. And remember also the trip to Israel, the Israel tour that we have in the works for later this year in October 19th to the 30th. going with myself and Rod and Rabbi Singer to Israel. You can go and look at www.israeltours.com/GET, capital BIBLICAL.html. That's www.israeltours.com/getbiblical.html. You'll be able to see the itinerary, the pricing, and so forth. We encourage you to save your shekels because it's going to be an amazing tour.
It is.
Yep.
We got to go.
We got to go.